Common Sense Living podcast today. My name is Annalie Master, and I have a really special treat today. I'm really impressed with Dr. Michael B. Biamonte.
Biamonte. Just
Yes.
think Italian when you
Yes.
pronounce
And he's the founder of the Biamonte Center for Clinical Nutrition. He's a co-creator of Biocybernetics, which is an unprecedented computer software program that's able to study blood work, mineral tests, and many other lab tests to determine exactly where your body is imbalanced, initially designed for aerospace purposes. As a practitioner for over 30 years, he is dedicated to improving the lives of his patients and helping them get back to living. He holds a doctorate of naturopathy, I probably say that wrong, naturopathy, and is a New York State certified clinical nutritionist. He is a professional member of the International and American Association of Clinical Nutritionists, the American College of Nutrition, and is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board for the Clinical Nutrition Certification Board. He is listed in the Directory of Distinguished Americans for his research in nutrition and physiology. And I am just honored to have you on my program today because nutrition is so important. And some of the reading I had done with what you deal with is like the thyroid. And I know the doctors say you're in this parameter. Oh, you're good. Well, it doesn't mean you're good. So
No, not at all. That's one subject in healthcare I could say there's a million holes in is understanding thyroid function. Partly because the doctors don't know enough about testing correctly for thyroid. Some doctors do a TSH and a T4 on people, and they think they have all the data, and they're so far away from it. In order to construct a really effective thyroid program, I've had to take data from essentially 3 different doctors and put it all together. One is Dr. Weston Childs. Weston Childs specializes in interpreting blood work for thyroid and also making nutritional formulas that will work instead of the medications. Dr. David Watts, who's the head owner and researcher of Trace Elements Incorporated. They do hair analysis studies, and they study the mineral ratios, and they understand how those mineral ratios affect hormones, affect your neurotransmitters. And then also Dr. Eric Rind. He has a website that you can go to. And on his website, he will teach you how to use your body temperatures to come up with a more accurate understanding of the state of your thyroid function than any blood test is ever going to do.
Wow, that's
Well,
fascinating.
I've combined those three doctors' research into coming up with a thyroid program that utilizes all their data, all their knowledge, and it gives you a very comprehensive look at what your thyroid's actually doing. Because blood work misses telling you what your thyroid receptor sites are doing. See, your thyroid receptor sites, and this goes back to Guyton's physiology book. In Guyton's physiology, Guyton had written many years ago that in some ways we still don't fully understand calcium and potassium act as regulators for thyroid receptors. Calcium acts like a governor, and the potassium acts to upregulate the thyroid. And we now know since then that it also, zinc and copper are also important. So it kind of goes that copper and zinc in your tissues regulate the uptake of your thyroid hormone, while zinc and potassium upregulate it. So calcium and copper downregulate, zinc and potassium upregulate, and that's the balance. That's how your body achieves a balance in how it responds to your thyroid hormone. It's based on copper and calcium downregulating while zinc and potassium upregulate.
Wow, that's complicated in itself.
Right, but if you don't have familiarity with these tests, mineral tissue tests, and you're relying on blood work, you totally missed it, because you could have somebody with perfect blood work, and if those receptors are really wonky, this person's going to manifest every symptom of low thyroid, and they're going to have low body temperatures, and the doctor's going to sit there and say, well, your tests are all fine. Those are the tests that he's looking at are all fine. See?
Yeah, I've always run a 97 point something for my temperature. Always.
Anyone who's below 97.8 has a functionally low thyroid. The gray area is 97.8 to 98.2. That could be thought of as a gray area. But once you go below 97.8, your thyroid's functionally low. Your temperature ideally should be above 98.2.
Wow. And didn't I just hear something recently that they said 97 something was okay? So
Well,
then,
that's because so many people are coming up with these. You have to remember, this is how laboratories come up with
yep.
how their reference ranges is based on how many people are showing this. The smarter labs, the better labs look at the population. This is what we did when we organized biocybernetics. We only took the levels of healthy people who had no symptoms. We looked at healthy people with no symptoms. We looked at what their levels were, and we constructed our reference ranges based on that. And there are other labs that will still do that. But if you're a lab and you just generally take everybody who's got every disease and every symptom in the world, and you take all their data and you compile it and you come up with a reference range where your reference range includes a lot of people who are really sick.
Interesting. Yeah. No wonder everybody's confused.
Confusion. Well, then just from the blood work viewpoint, from what
Yeah.
Dr. Childs would look at, um, he typically will include fasting insulin on all his blood work for thyroid. And the reason for that is elevated insulin downregulates your thyroid. So you could have what appears to be very normal thyroid chemistries, but if your fasting insulin is high, it's suppressing the activity. And when you're looking at hormones, you have to remember that hormones hit target sites in your body, receptor sites, and that's where they work. So the fact that a hormone is at a good level doesn't guarantee it's actually working.
Yeah.
That's where we can fall back on looking at those mineral ratios, the calcium, copper, and zinc and potassium, and then your body temperature. Because we're getting to see the end result of the effect of the hormone.
So say you have a lot of a mineral in your body floating around. Oh, yeah, you're good, right? But no, maybe it's floating around because you're not using it.
Well, actually, not to be anal about this, but technically it doesn't float around. You see, what happens, it deposits someplace. And then the more of the element that deposits, the more you have a tissue overload of that element. And that's when you really end up with trouble, especially when it comes to calcium, because that's how you develop arterial sclerosis, is you have the calcium depositing in your tissues and in your blood vessels. But essentially, you're correct. What you're describing is biounavailability, is what we would call it. It's biologically unavailable to your body because it's depositing all over the place rather than working where it's supposed to.
Right. Well, there's a lot of us messed up out there.
Well,
I'm a nurse, but I call myself an alternative nurse because I believe more like you do. I go deeper, but unfortunately, I don't know enough. And sometimes I think I know too much.
well, that could be. That's knowing too much isn't a bad thing as long as you understand where it stops and where it begins. But back to Dr. Childs, he also has redone the reference ranges for certain thyroid levels. Like he's found that reverse T3 should be much lower than labs are allowing it. Labs are again allowing a lot of people with really elevated reverse T3 to come into their reference range. And they'll accept it up to, if some labs go up to 24, and he found it should be lower than 10. And he's also found that free T3 should be much higher than labs think. And again, that was comparing the levels of athletes and people who were really in great health compared to what the average. So that's a lesson to be learned when you're looking at labs. You have to have your interpretation correct.
And each lab has their own.
Yeah,
Now,
they can. Yeah.
the reason I say that is my husband went to the colonoscopy doctor, and he had labs done there, and the regular doctor had labs done. Regular doctor says he's fine. The other doctor said, nah, you need to tweak it a bit.
Yeah.
Because I want to say, I don't remember which lab it was, but say 4 is good, and he was 4.2 at one and 3.8 at the other, kind of thing. So
there's two schools of thought I've encountered, and both of them aren't totally wrong. One of them is that when you're looking at labs, there can be a variation that occurs in a test. And that could occur for a lot of different reasons. If the person does not do a fasting blood test, in my opinion, I throw them out. For the type of work I need to do, I have to have the blood test fasting.
Right.
Because if it's not fasting, you get too much of a variation in certain parameters for me to really trust it. But if a doctor is looking for pathology and he has a person who does a non-fasting blood test, that's not necessarily unworkable, because the levels that you have to show certain pathologies are going to be relatively high, and whether you fasted or not may not affect that.
Right.
But on the other hand, there is also a natural variation that occurred day to day in your own body's production of different substances that show up in the blood. So you may have something show up abnormal one day, but then in the next 10 blood tests you do, it could be normal.
Hmm.
So that happens also. So you have to be quick not to pull the trigger on certain things. If you have somebody whose blood work suddenly shows something elevated or very low, you have to look at it and say, well, maybe this might have been affected by something they did, and there was something affecting them in that time period. It doesn't mean this has to be chronic. And
Right.
then you watch the test. You see the next time they do a blood test, if it's still that way, well, now you have more validity and
Right. If you
more
were sick
reason
three
to act
days
on it.
ago, could even affect it.
Yeah, like if you had a cold or a flu 3
Yeah.
days ago and your white blood count is low, well, it doesn't mean you have AIDS, you see?
Right.
But there are doctors who sometimes, your show is called Common Sense. There are
Yeah.
some doctors people don't have the common sense enough to think with that.
Right. There's a lot of people out there that don't.
Yeah.
I was raised in the 50s and 60s, and I was raised with common sense. I always think a little bit deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Common sense is something that the more you watch the news in the last few years, it's waning,
Oh
seriously.
yeah, I know, I know, I know. Wow. So what are some of our common pitfalls in our nutrition, other than too much fake sugar or sugar?
Common pitfalls and just generally in people's nutrition.
Yeah.
I would say the biggest problem is GMO foods.
And lab grown now.
Yeah, well, yeah, this
Yeah.
what's his name? Bill Gates is wanting everyone
Yeah.
to eat this synthetic meat that he's growing. He's a character. First, he's going to vaccinate you to death, and then
To
he's
finish
going to
you
feed
off.
you phony meat.
Yeah. If
No,
you
well,
didn't
that's
get back,
obvious,
they're going to get you that
right?
way.
He's going to get you that way. So, man, but I would say it's eating non-organic, non-GMO, and that's a study in itself. Because
Yeah.
when you go to the stores, you have to be able to read the labels. But eating someone who eats organic and is eating non-GMO, they're doing about the best they can with the food chain and the food supply that they're going to encounter.
Right.
So that's, I would say, was the first priority. And that also would answer the question, if there was one single thing I could tell anybody about health, that's what I would tell them. I would
Yep.
tell them, eat non-GMO, try to eat as organic as possible. We have patients sometimes with really severe candida, and they'll
Mm.
go to Italy. And while they're in Italy, they'll be eating pasta and bread and all these foods you're not supposed to eat if you have candida. And their symptoms are relatively mild, if none at all.
Yep.
And then they come back to the United States and they try to do the same thing, and they just break out into a full-blown problem again.
Right.
And what's the difference? Well, the food there is all organic and
Right.
non-GMO.
And something the Americans don't understand, and I learned this in cosmetics. Europe has a standard that they don't have all this crap in it. And oh, we'll buy that. Product A. Oh, yeah, I'm going to
Mhm.
buy that because it's in Europe. But the standard for the Americans is dump anything you want to in it.
And
So you're buying the product at those prices, but you're
right.
getting a bunch of shit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good for people to know.
Yeah, it is. That's what I like about my show. And I have had 2 hits on YouTube because I had said giving flu shots one year. I'll probably get another hit on this one now. Aborted fetal tissue and H1N1 was in one year. And I always have the insert there. It came off the insert, and yet YouTube said, Ann. But
Well, YouTube removed all my podcasts on autism. Claiming that I was saying things which weren't true. Now, I wish those people actually get clinically in the chair and actually start to work with autistic kids in their lab work, and then we're going to see how much these things aren't true.
right. And trying to find somebody that does your kind of work isn't very easy.
Mm.
I found a couple of them in San Antonio, and functional is the best I can come up with. But
Right.
yeah, all the stuff that they do. Well, in defense of my doctor, when I told him I'm starting my course called Taming Diabetes Differently, because if you do it the way the medical system tells you to do it, you'll always have it and get worse.
Well, that's the whole point. That's
Exactly.
the point. There's an old joke that the
Yes.
first thing is you never kill the patient.
Mhm.
That's the first thing. Never kill the patient. Second thing is never cure the patient. Because if you do either, he's not there to buy your subscription medications.
Exactly.
So you can't kill him, you can't cure him.
I wrote a chapter in an anthology called Pain for Profit, and I used myself as an example.
Mhm.
This is 3 years ago, and I worked too hard in the garden and not proper body mechanics. And oh man, I was hurting so bad. I'm walking with a limp, high pain tolerance over a 10. And three months later, I went to the doctor, and the MA said, um, prednisone and NSAIDs are therapy. I said therapy, and why was that the last thing offered? It should have been the first. Start
Mhm.
less and then,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I know what prednisone can do and all that. So they sent me to a hokey therapist that had 6 people he was in charge of, and it was like going to a gym. And I said, yeah, but I still hurt here. Oh, well, then it's this. So then 3 months after that, I go to the hip doctor because I'd had a hip replacement several years before, and I go back every year. And I said, he said, oh, you need another hip surgery. Didn't even look at it. And I said, well, how about an x-ray? He said, we'll do that next year. Well, the appointment was yesterday and I didn't go because
Oh,
he's trying to make up for the money that he lost during COVID.
right. Right. Yeah,
So
that's
yeah, so then I waited a little longer and decided maybe I should get a bone density. Maybe it's something with my bones. So I did. And that doctor, praise him, he sent me to Results Therapy in San Antonio, 281 and Evans Road, for anybody that's aware. They were awesome. The guy pushed on my psoas muscle. Oh man, it hurt. Oh, it hurt like hell, but I endured it. The first time in 3 years, I was able to walk out of an appointment without a limp.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd say now I'm 85% back. I,
Amazing.
I still have trouble crossing my leg over like a tie shoe, but I can do it, but it hurts.
Right.
But yeah, so there are
So that's
avenues
instead of
out
having a
there.
hip replacement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I caught on, well, because I have common sense. I think
Right.
it through, and they don't listen, and so anyway, but this doctor, when I went this time, and I said how, well, back it up on organic food, I'm 80-20, 80 organic, 20% I'm human, because you can't get away from the crap. So I go back to visit family last year. They don't eat anything healthy. It's whatever's cheap, even eggs, but they'll not organic. Oh God, it almost turns my stomach to think about it. But I gave up and I just ate everything. I came home and my A1C was 5.9. Freaked me out. That's when I started my program. And 6 weeks later, it was 4.9.
There
The
you go.
doctor asked me, how did you do that? And I said, through my program, eating healthy, doing the right things. And yeah, I bounce because I like my ice cream, but at least I
Mhm.
know, and I know I can control it, and I'm right back on it. My
Well,
course starts
you could
tonight.
also make the ice cream yourself at home.
Oh
Very
yeah,
simple. Simplest thing in the world is to buy an ice cream maker, use your own ingredients, and do it at home.
yeah. It'd be worth it as much as I like my ice cream.
Yeah, it would be.
Oh, supplements. What about supplements? Everybody's got a supplement. How do you know when they're the good ones or not?
Well, you just get tested. This is the thing that's the doctor of the future will do.
Mm,
The doctor of the future is going to have on a patient there a complete genetic test. He's going to know every genetic error in your body, what you're prone to. And then he's going to do functional tests to see what your levels are, your levels of nutrients, your amino acid levels, your hormones, your vitamins, your minerals, your fatty acids. He's going to have all that data to see where you are. And he's going to be able to recommend supplements based on correcting imbalances that he finds. This will be the doctor of the future.
mm, yeah.
Thomas Edison said the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but he will um I can't I'd have to paraphrase him, but he will give attention to diet and more items that have to do with natural lifestyle. And this is the exact vision Thomas Edison had in terms of
Mm,
what we will have of the doctor of the future. He'll be armed with the genetic information of his patient, and then he'll be looking at the patient's lab work, which shows you in present time what his nutrient levels are. And his goal is going to be to balance the person out by giving the right supplement, not by going to the health food store with a coupon that you got in the paper to have $5 off on some CoQ10 product they're selling, but
yeah.
actually to have a lab test that shows you what you need and what you don't need. Because the biggest thing people don't understand, and the health industry doesn't want you to know, is that when you take supplements that you don't need, you're throwing yourself out of balance.
Right.
Person who goes to the health food store and buys all these supplements because he read about them in a book or it's the latest fad, is every 10 years there's a new fad. Back in the 80s, the fad was vitamin E, and then the fad became fish oil, and then the fad became magnesium, and then the fad became CoQ10. And there's always every 10 years a new fad.
And now it's bone broth stuff.
Bone broth is, yeah, that's a rising fad.
Right.
But the problem is people take things not knowing if they need them.
Right.
And then the senior problem is when you take something that you don't need, you throw yourself out of balance. It is true that vitamins, many of them are water soluble and you pee them out. But what they're not telling you is that while you're peeing out the vitamin, you're also peeing out some other vitamin or a mineral, that element, that excess of whatever you're taking that you don't need is binding to or chelating and pulling out.
Right.
People who take huge amounts of vitamin C have to watch their copper levels. They can develop a copper deficiency. People who are taking high amounts of calcium could suppress their magnesium. People who take too much vitamin D can also suppress and cause their magnesium to become biounavailable. And it goes on and on.
Dog?
Yep, D. Vitamin D imbalances magnesium. If you take too much D, you end up with biounavailable magnesium. You end up with magnesium in your test that will be sky high because your system's not using it. If you don't, so it just goes on, and this is why people take supplements, and sometimes they cause more harm than good.
So that's an interesting twist to it. So you go out and you spend all this money on the supplement.
Hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, which instead don't buy any of those and go and get tested.
Yeah.
By the correct tests.
Yes.
And you're going to spend your money there, spend it here.
Yeah, you're better off getting the test and then seeing what you need to take. And if you can't afford to buy it all, at least you buy the key things.
Right.
You'll be in better shape than if you just went to the store and bought all these supplements that you don't know whether or not you need, and you may cause a serious imbalance in your system.
Right. And I'm guilty. I buy too many supplements, I'm sure. And they're so expensive. I told my husband I'm going to be cutting back on them because everybody's got the latest, greatest. And MitoQ was one, and that was so expensive. And they're all expensive. And then, you don't even know that they're quality made. They say they are, but are they really? So.
Well, we would hope it. Some companies have a reputation, like Metagenics, for instance, and Pure Encapsulations have great reputations. Probably the best quality around.
I've used Pure Encapsulations.
Yeah, so we would hope if we're using those that it is a good product. But if you're not tested, you're asking for trouble. So that's another piece of advice I give people is before you go out and spend a lot of money on supplements, don't listen to the PR from the health food store and the vitamin companies. If you take supplements that you don't need, you're imbalancing your chemistries. There was a woman on Instagram, I forgot her name, but she was talking about thyroid function. And she was saying that all people with low thyroid need to take zinc, they need to take copper, they need to take a few different nutrients. And I'm looking at this, I wrote in and I said, oh my God, people with low thyroid, especially women who are estrogen dominant, tend to be very high in copper and actually tend to be copper toxic. And copper as an element directly downregulates all thyroid hormones. Copper is like one of the most devastating things to your thyroid. And she wrote back and she says, yes, but foods high in copper are also high in zinc, and nature is smart. Well, that may be true, but that doesn't handle the imbalance that the person has. If you have somebody who's already copper toxic, giving them foods high in copper is not that the fact that they have some zinc in there isn't functionally going to do anything. Right. And when I see people like this create these posts, the first thing I'm realizing is this person has very little clinical experience and they know nothing about testing their patients to really determine what is needed and what isn't needed. Because once you test the patient and you see their copper is elevated, first of all, you can't correct that with food anyway. You have to correct that using supplementation. And giving them foods that are high in copper are only going to add to the problem. Right.
Yeah, you can have a balance, but even if things are balanced and you're already up here, it's going to stay there and you're never going to bring it down.
Well, it's like the concept of taking a multivitamin. Someone asked me this the other day on a different podcast. Does a multivitamin do you any good? Well, a multivitamin can only increase the present balance you have or support that. It can't correct an imbalance because you don't know what the imbalance is in the first
Right.
place.
Right.
The basis of a multivitamin is a little bit of everything. So let's say a person has excess calcium that they're not utilizing, and you give them a multivitamin that has calcium. Well, now they have a little more of the calcium.
Exactly.
You see, you're not giving them something that's going to balance them. The only way you can balance the person is to find out what their balance or imbalance is and then work to correct it. That's the only way you can do it. You can't do it by just arbitrarily, aimlessly giving supplements.
Well, I do think that the world will shift and be better doctors, like you're talking about doctors of the future, because so many people are sick and getting sicker, and just their life is lacking so much because of it. And they go to the doctor and they're just in debt to the expense of the medical system. And people are gonna wake up. I really think so. Because, you know, it's like it comes to the peak. And I think we're pretty much at the peak when people will wake up and start hearing more of people like you. And then people like me sharing it helps as well. I learn, and now all my listeners will learn too. And I know Valerie is on. She always listens, and she's a functional, not medicine, but she does labs.
Mm-hmm.
So Valerie, I'll probably giving you a call. Oh, gee, you are spectacular in your knowledge.
Well, I've been doing this since 1982.
Wow.
And I've learned from some of the best. So I'm fortunate in that.
Yeah. There is so much. There's so much to learn. What else tidbits of information you want to share? Just anything that you've got the floor.
There's a phenomenon now that we call paradoxical B12 deficiency. This is one of the latest toys that we've had out there. Paradoxical B12 deficiency is a condition which is recognized by someone who is not taking vitamin B12, having very elevated B12 levels in their blood for unknown reasons.
Huh.
On a hair analysis, you will find that this is reflected by elevated cobalt levels, because cobalt is that element is the center of the B12 molecule. So on a hair test, cobalt represents vitamin B12. So you can find someone with really elevated cobalt or B12 in their blood. They're not taking it, and people wonder why. What is this about? If they were taking it, it'd be obvious. They're taking too much. So stop taking it. The next blood test, it should go down, right? But that's not what happens with people with this condition. What we discovered is that vitamin B2, riboflavin, needs to be present in a certain amount in your body in order for B12 to be utilized. So if you have a B2 deficiency, and it may not even be a clinical deficiency, see, that's something I need to cover separately, but there are different degrees of deficiencies, let's say for now.
Wow.
And if you don't have enough vitamin B2, you don't utilize the B12, so the B12 elevates. You give the person the vitamin B2, and the B12 starts to come down because they start to utilize it. Now, there are conditions which can also mess this up. If a person has elevated copper or mercury, that copper and mercury can interfere with B2 utilization. So you'd have to step back for a second, and now you have to, if you have a person with this, you need to see if they're copper toxic or mercury toxic, detox them of the copper and mercury, then the B2 will be available to lower the B12.
You're talking about the mercury. And several years ago, I paid buku bucks to have my old fillings out. And my C-reactive protein was like HS C-reactive protein was like a 3.3, and it went down to like a 1 point something.
Yeah.
And I was 3 months later, I was amazed.
Yeah, that's mercury's bad news.
Yeah.
Which is
and I also had gone to the Swiss clinic. Oh gosh, what year? But anyhow, when I was 65, I went over there with the Green Smoothie Girl, Robin Openshaw, and her group. And I had gosh, what's that called, where they put it in your vein to do the mercury?
to pull it out?
Yeah, something like that.
DMPS.
Yes, yes. Are you or someone you know dealing with blood sugar issues like diabetes? You can lower even reverse these issues. I lowered my A1C from 5.9 to 4.9 in just 6 weeks. My doctor was impressed. I'm a nurse, certified health coach, and educator. Gift yourself or another with this course, Taming Diabetes Differently. Change your life and theirs. Contact Annalie Master at tamingdiabetes@yahoo.com or call 972-948-9976 and be sure to leave a message. Yeah, that was interesting.
Whenever anyone has their fillings removed, there's a couple of things you have to know. Is first of all, the dentist who does this has to be using something called a rubber dam. That is the first most basic thing. The dentists can employ a lot of other measures when they're removing the fillings to make sure that you don't ingest the mercury that they're pulling out. But you've got to be really careful that he knows what he's doing, because if he doesn't, your health will take a downturn.
Yeah,
you'll be sick and you won't know why.
Like a little rubber thing back there so I wouldn't breathe it.
Breathe it in, right? That's the least.
Yeah.
That's the very least they need to do. I've treated many dentists in my life for mercury toxicity. I'll never forget the first one. The first one came to me, it must have been in 1985. He had chronic diarrhea all the time. He was shaking. How do you have a dentist with his hands shaking? How is he supposed to work on you?
Exactly.
It was neurological. He was developing mercury, like a mercury poisoning.
Yeah.
And I tested him and I found his mercury was off the chart.
Oh.
And it took us 2 years to get this fellow's mercury back down. And then after that, he was fine. Everything went, all the symptoms went away. But I've also had other dentists who refused to acknowledge and believe that was true. They had all the symptoms of mercury toxicity. I showed them their test high in mercury and they refused to believe it because, of course, they had a vested interest at that point in putting mercury in people's mouths.
Wow.
So going back to something I was just saying about deficiencies, there are different degrees of deficiencies that can occur. We have a clinical deficiency that occurs when a person's nutrient level is so low that it physically manifests. Now, this would be somebody like with vitamin D deficiency to the point where they get rickets, or they get mottling of the teeth, okay? Or vitamin C to the point where they get scurvy. So those are clinical deficiencies. Then you have a subclinical deficiency. That's a deficiency that's below that level, where the person has problems due to lack of an optimal level of the vitamin. So this is maybe somebody who gets sick too often because they don't have enough vitamin C. He doesn't have scurvy, but he gets sick too often because he doesn't have enough vitamin C. His gums bleed maybe a little bit too much because there's not enough vitamin C to support the collagen. See? Then you have another level where we're not even entering or talking about deficiencies anymore, but you're talking about pharmacology action of the nutrient. A nutrient can have a nutritional function. It can have a pharmacological function, like vitamin B6 is the first thing that came to mind. You can take vitamin B6 as a diuretic. Vitamin B6 is a pretty effective diuretic, but you've got to take somewhere usually around 500 milligrams for it to have that effect. So that's using the vitamin like a drug. And then the next level up from there you have is a toxicological effect, where you take so much of the nutrient that it's actually acting like a toxin in your body.
Wow. Fine balance.
Yeah, there is. Especially since supplements are available and you can experiment with these things. So you can get all kinds of interesting phenomena going on. But as long as somebody knows that you can have different levels of deficiencies, that's important because it allows other things to make more sense.
I remember many, many years ago, probably 50 years ago by now, I was taking a lot of B vitamins. And I was working in the factory at the time. And after lunch, and I'd say, I smell cheeseburgers, whatever. And then I got to thinking, I took my vitamins then, around then. So I'm thinking, it was just coming out in my sweat.
Oh, okay.
That I could smell it, But growing up, I had rickets and I had teeth that didn't come in that should have and stuff like that. And my mom had lost a baby between my sister and I and had to stay in bed in order for me to be born. So I think all that, and I was about 8 years old. And then I had what was called Huntington's chorea. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yes.
Okay. Second cousin of rheumatic fever is how he had explained it. And my aunt at the time was kind of like the old school, the herbalist and stuff. And she said I needed vitamin C. And she gave me a jar of Tang. Remember Tang?
Oh, yeah, I remember Tang. The astronaut
Tasted
strength
pretty
Tang.
good.
Right.
Anyway, so, that's what got us started on the vitamins. And so I've always been a health nut without even knowing that I was,
Hmm.
eat from the ground, and I revere all the plants, that I
Absolutely.
just think you can't go wrong with them. Unfortunately, in Texas this last year, most of mine all burned up and died. They can handle the cold, but not that extreme heat and drought.
What most people don't know is that a great many pharmaceutical drugs, the active ingredients were discovered in plants.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of people don't know that.
That's
That
why
a lot of
that's
medicines come from plants.
exactly. But now they have been um tinkered with by our wonderful friend that thinks he's a scientist.
Now, who might that be?
Oh, I think it might be I think of a swinging gate.
Yes,
Who-
I could bill that as being correct.
Yes.
Yes, but also the other thing too, which is interesting, is that you can't, and this goes back to the Rockefellers.
Yes.
The Rockefellers were the ones who got the idea of to make pharmaceuticals because they had a tremendous amount of leftover coal tar from their oil industry, and they
Mm.
didn't know what to do with it.
Mm.
And someone showed them they could take that coal tar and synthesize the active ingredients in herbs. And one of the first ones they came up with was digitalis, which is the best example. Digitalis is the active ingredient in an herb called foxglove.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, but you see, the problem is when you grow a plant, you cannot put any kind of government regulation or patent on the plants.
Yep.
You
All
can't
about the money.
patent, yeah, go back to that. You
Yep. Here we
cannot
go.
patent a
All about the
plant.
money.
So, and this is why, this is to a large extent, this is why we have the pharmaceutical industry that we have, is because the pharmaceutical industry was born out of the necessity of these people to be able to patent the active ingredient in something so that they were the exclusive, therefore, providers of it. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, people would be going out in their backyard growing these plants.
And the smart ones still are.
That's true.
It's like, I haven't had the flu since 1968. In 57, I had the flu, the pandemic of 57. 2 weeks
Hmm.
later, I got it again. 1968, I had it again. Haven't had it since.
That's pretty
And
good.
yeah, well, I don't take the flu shot. I took one in 2006. To me, it starts with your attitude, mind over matter, so to speak. So I
Hmm.
refuse to get sick.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes I don't feel the greatest, but I don't have to miss work for it because I'm not sick.
Well, vaccines are very controversial, even before the COVID vaccine,
Oh yeah.
which is now breaking every record for controversy. But even before then, vaccines were somewhat controversial, and it's not the science of inoculation is good and reliable, and it's been proven throughout history that inoculation can work. The
Right.
problem is with modern vaccines, when you load them up with all kinds of garbage, you don't know what's happening to the person at that point. You don't know, what is this reaction they're getting? Why are they sick after getting the vaccine?
Hmm.
Well, the doctor wants to explain you're sick after getting the vaccine because it's your immune system being stimulated by that. Well,
Right.
that might be great if the vaccine didn't have thimerosal and all kinds of nanoparticles and all kinds of weird things from outer space in it.
Snake venom.
Right. Well, yeah, from the king cobra.
Yep, yep. And there's supposed to be a drug, and I can't remember. I just was reading it. Um, that not a drug, a natural thing that counters it. And it
That
starts
counters what exactly?
the snake venom. I just read it on an email the other day, and it's something with hydroxychloroquine. Could it be something
Could
like
be.
that? Big,
No, well, we know that what detoxifies people
yeah.
from the vaccine.
And it came with nicotine also,
Yes, that's right.
so
That's
that
right.
you take the
With
nicotine
nicotine.
and that
That's
snake
correct.
venom goes to that, releases from where it is and goes to that, and then it's eliminated. Now,
Right.
how many people are going to do that? I mean,
Not many. Not many.
no,
No, I don't think
no.
so. But it's not even necessary to do that because to detoxify someone from the vaccine, specifically the COVID vaccine, you first have to destroy any remaining particles of the DNA of the virus, which
Mhm.
the spike protein might be hanging on to.
Right.
And then it's been proven in several countries there are different enzymes that can destroy the spike protein. Now, interestingly enough, there's a blood test been available for the spike protein for quite some time. And according to Dr. Fauci, the spike protein is supposed to leave your body in a few weeks. Well, I've tested people who had it in their body for years after being vaccinated. But you can, if you take bromelain, if you take nattokinase and any high uh, chymotrypsin enzyme, that will digest the spike protein and eliminate it within a few weeks.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's all to make us sick, and people don't believe it. They think I'm, oh yes, either, well, what everybody says, a conspiracy theorist or whatever, you know. No, I've got common sense.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
even now, this is a different topic yet. Ozempic, and me going to be with this diabetes course. It's like, why do you take a drug when you can do it with food and your attitude? You know, it doesn't mean you can't have ice cream ever again. Like you said, make your own or have it as a treat, not a daily thing. Um, I get so.
I don't know if you're aware what's been going on social media with diabetes in the last week, but apparently Dr. Oz has taken some of the top herbal remedies for diabetes and he has put them in a gummy. And apparently the gummy delivery system, now this is not an advertisement for Dr. Oz, this is going to end up being this way, but apparently this gummy delivery system creates an outstanding effect with these substances on your body. And he is claiming that he can cure diabetes in a few days.
Wow.
And it will never come back. Now, he's had huge celebrities come on and testify to this. He's had a commercial that was on Instagram and Facebook where some major celebrities who had diabetes came on and said that they've been taking this pill, their diabetes is gone, their A1C went from 8 down to 3 in a couple of weeks. So I think this is interesting. Why I think it's interesting is because somebody of Dr. Oz's stature to make out unbelievable claims like this, if it's not true, then he is ready for the straitjacket because
Right.
he already has 16 lawsuits on him from this because apparently the drug companies are freaking out.
Sure they are.
The drug companies are worried that Ozempic and all these other drugs, metformin, are all going to be out in the garbage. If what he's saying is true, literally he's going to take a tremendous bite out of the drug companies' yearly gross income.
Well, the drug companies are going to go down the tube. They are. Because enough of us are waking up to it. Same as like the Ozempic. Okay, now we have Wegovy. A lady I know, and she's got a PhD, not a doctor, but the PhD, and she takes her weekly Wegovy shot. Oh, her hands just shake like crazy and her heart races. Why are you taking it? And then I ask them, do you know the mechanism of action? First up, they don't even understand what I'm talking about. And I say, it cuts your digestion 70%. So now you're not only not eating as much, you know, you're not getting your nutrients that you need because you're only getting 30% out of what you eat. And then you go out with all your group of friends and you're having, you know, your drinks and whatever. And this is another thing I read. I had 3 things here. And she says, oh, nothing goes down. You know, so anyhow, emergency room, right? 100% shut down in her gut. Didn't digest nothing. Another one, the husband found his wife laying on the floor with all this ooze out of her mouth. She regurgitated everything, you know, or it just whatever, but because she couldn't digest. And still they take it.
It's bad enough because as you get older, there's a few tricks that God plays on you when you get older. The first is that he lowers your stomach acid so that you can't absorb things the way you used to. And that's why you'll see old people shaking. That's from magnesium deficiency. And then your DHEA levels drop. And that's how your hormones go down. So it's bad enough we have those 2 things without having to take drugs that are going to further amplify these problems as we get older. But according to Dr. Oz, there's nobody out there who needs to take insulin or take Ozempic or take metformin anymore. This new supplement that he's introducing, which is a gummy, and the gummy, I do recognize the ingredients he has in there. They're very common ingredients that you find in a lot of blood sugar formulas, but the difference appears to be that in the gummy, they're transported into your body and like 100% absorbed. So I would, it's going to be interesting to see over the next few months the results that people get from this.
Right. Yeah, I'll be listening for that.
Me too.
Oh yeah, that would just be so awesome. Yeah, that's why they want to shut the people down like you and I, because we're telling the truth.
Yes,
And
it's true.
I'm not afraid of them. They can take me out if they want to. I don't care. I'm going to die sometime, but I plan to live to 125,
That's good.
and I'll be 74 next month.
Okay.
So I got another 50 to go. I got to guide some of these dummies and shape them up, you know.
With common sense. Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Common sense.
Oh, geez, it's been wonderful talking to you. You have anything else that you want to add? Because we're getting down to the time, but I think we could talk all day.
Yeah, that's true. Well, the main thing just trying to keep with the theme of the show is that people who are supplement advocates or who are big into supplements, they really need to consider getting some kind of test to see whether or not they're not creating imbalances and deficiencies. And just to rail through a few of them, most people don't know, is that if you take large amounts of vitamin C, you can create a copper deficiency. Also zinc. Large amounts of zinc or C, you can cause a copper deficiency. You can also cause a calcium deficiency by taking excess vitamin C.
Hmm.
If you take too much vitamin E, you can cause a manganese deficiency. If you take too much magnesium, you can cause a calcium deficiency. And you could also cause an iron deficiency because magnesium can suppress iron.
Hmm.
If you take too much iron, you can aggravate your blood pressure because iron actually can raise someone's blood pressure. It's not just that anemic people have low blood pressure, it's that the lack of iron also causes your pressure to drop. Actually, the lack of the element itself. Also, the lack of manganese can cause your pressure to go up or down. If you have too much manganese, your pressure can go too high. If it's not enough, it can go down.
Wow.
So there's a whole spectrum of nutrients, and within all the nutrients that exist, there is a wheel that we call the nutrient wheel. And on this nutrient wheel, we have every nutrient listed, and we have arrows going from one nutrient to another, and the arrows could be going back and forth, which could mean that this element can suppress this one, or this one actually could raise the other one.
Hmm.
So for instance, manganese can raise potassium, so can zinc. But copper can suppress potassium. And we can go on all day. Vitamin E can raise your sodium levels. So calcium can suppress your potassium levels. We can just go on and on all day like this.
Right.
And all these nutrients interact with each other. You don't just take the vitamin and that's all there is to it. The vitamin interacts with other vitamins, minerals, and amino acids and fatty acids. They all interact. And if you do something that's out of balance for your body, you'll make your chemistries worse to the point where eventually you may be symptomatic of it.
Right. So best advice is to eat organic and,
eat organic, but then get tested to see what
Right.
supplements you really need. That's the key
Right.
thing. If you're going to take supplements, which most people need, because our soils have been depleted of nutrients in this country for the last 75 years. And that was proven, that's been proven time after time.
Right.
But if you're gonna go venture into investing into supplements for yourself, make sure you get tested so that you know you're taking the right ones and you're not further causing imbalances.
Good advice. Okay, is there anything else you want to add?
I think that's enough for people to chew on for a while.
I think so. I would love to have you back sometime. You're
Sure.
fascinating. I'm honored.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Biamonte, for being on the Common Sense Living Show today. And I want to thank all you listeners, and I certainly hope you got a lot to chew on. And yeah, I'm going to go look some of this stuff up that we talked about. So, all righty. So thanks for coming in and for all my listeners, and see you guys next time. Toodaloo. Thank you for tuning in to my Common Sense Living podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm sure you learned something new. Please leave a kind review and share this episode with a friend. And be sure to subscribe yourself. You'll find me on iTunes, Spotify, and other platforms. And don't forget, we'll be here again next week with another insightful episode of Common Sense Living I can hardly wait.